Hashem, today's daf yomi is Zevachim Nun Aleph, Zevachim 51. We're going to start on Nun Amud Beis and 50b, 10 lines from the bottom. Gemara is discussing four different ways of deriving laws from the Torah, which are Kal V'chomer, Binyan Av, Hekesh, and Gzera Shava. Gzera Shava is where the word is the same. Hekesh is where the two passages are right next to each other in the Torah, and we compare the laws. Kal V'chomer is an analogy from a lesser case to a stronger case. And the Binyan Av is a comparison where they're not necessarily related, but the laws are similar. So then the Gemara wants to know if by kachim we can, by sacred law, animals, sacred activities, we can derive a derivation from a law that was itself derived from one of these methods. So the Gemara is going through all the 16 permutations, and now in the bottom of 50b, davar alame b'kal v'chomer, if something is learned through this kal v'chomer, ma'oshe yilame b'binyan av, can this law then go back and teach through what's called a binyan av, through a comparison? So I'm a Rabbi Yirmiyah Tashma. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, let's try and bring a proof to you from the following. So let's first say a couple of laws as a background. The law is that if there's an animal that dies without being slaughtered, that's called a nevela, it's a carcass, and then that animal makes you tameh by touching it or carrying it. But if you do shchita on the animal, you slaughter it properly, then even though if it would be a treifa and not be kosher to eat, the shchita is motzia midei nevela. The proper slaughtering the animal makes it no longer a nevela, and therefore it does not transmit tumah. Now, this is the law of an animal. If there's a bird that is not slaughtered, it's a nevela sa'of, then the carcass transmits tumah, but in a lesser way. It doesn't transmit tumah by touching or carrying it. It transmits tumah only by swallowing it, only in the throat. And the third law is that a bird is slaughtered in order to be kosher. You have to do shlit on it. But in the Beis HaMikdash, there's a different way of killing the bird. In the Beis HaMikdash, they kill the bird. The Kohen would kill the bird through malika, through sticking his fingernail through the nape of the neck. So now the Gemara says the following: Tashma, because again we're trying to prove that something that's learned from a kal v'chomer can then go and teach through what's called the binyan av. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Tashma, Malik, let's say you did malika on a bird, v'nim says treifa, and you discover it to be treifa. So does the malika make it so that it's no longer a tameh? Is it motzia midei nevela? So Remeir Omer Eina Metames Bebeis Abliya. Remeir says it's no longer tameh because since you did the malika, the bird does not transmit tumah. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda Omer Metame Bebeis Abliya, he says no, the malika is not going to cause you. The malika does not make it. Is not motzia midei nevela, and it still transmits the tumah. So it's a fundamental dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says the malika takes it out of nevela, and Rabbi Yehuda says that this law of motzia midei nevela does not apply to a bird. But we're going to see later on Nun Aleph the position of Rabbi Yossi, and Rashi says there's three disputes. According to Rabbi Meir, basically whether it's the bird that is slaughtered or the bird that is killed through malika, the either way, if it's killed in the normal manner or if it's killed in the proper manner, it's no longer nevela. Rabbi Yehuda says no. This idea that if you slaughter the animal properly, it takes it out of a nevela, that only works by an animal, but not by a bird. And according to Rabbi Yossi, he says the middle position that shchita, that if you do slaughtering of the bird, that's mitahar it from nevela, but not malika. So anyway, back to our Gemara. So what's the basis for Rabbi Meir that if you do malika, if you kill the bird with your finger, that it is no longer nevela? Rabbi Meir says, let's go back and say, I'm a Rabbi Meir, kal v'chomer. First, we have to go to the bird itself. An animal, which is a carcass, shemetames b'magama. So it has a more severe form of tameh. It makes you tameh if you just touch it. and or carry it, shlitasa mitaresa. But if you slaughter the animal and you make it so it's no longer a carcass, even though it's a treifa and it's not kosher, so therefore the shlita takes it out. Shlita mitaras treifa samitumasa nevelas oaf to a carcass of a bird, which is a lesser form of tuma. She'ein mitame b'magumasa, which it only causes tuma by swallowing, not by touching. You know, din shetei shlitasa mitarasa. For sure, it should be the case that the shlita will say that if you slaughter the animal, it will be motzia midei nevela, even though it's not kosher because the bird happens to be a treifa. By slaughtering the animal, it will not be nevela. So first, by Kavachomer, he says if the slaughter of an animal makes it so it's not a nevela by an animal, so it for sure should work by a bird because a bird is a lesser form of tumah. And now, once he established that from a Kavachomer, Mamatzino, we do what's called a Mamatzino, which is basically another way of saying a Biyanav. Mamatzino b'shlita shemechsharta b'achila. What is the way that allows a bird to be in? The slaughtering. So just like the shlita is what allows the bird to be in, mitarasa, trefasa, mitumasa, and therefore the shlita is what allows it to no longer be tameh. We're on top of 51a. Af malika shemecharta b'achila, so too the malika, which is the equivalent of shlita, but by kochim, should also be the tayar trefasa mitumasa. So therefore, Rabbi Meir has said we learn first the kavachomer that a slaughter of a bird will be that's chulin will be taking it out from the vela, and then we learn from a mamatzino or binyanav that just like this works by shlita, it works by malika, and so therefore we've established that something that's learned out from a kavachomer can then go and teach through a binyanav. And then before we go on to analyze that point, the Gemara brings a third position here, which is the position of Rabbi Yossi, which I already quoted from the Rashi, which Rabbi Yossi says that no, this idea of Motzia Midei Nevela works by Shlita and not by Malika. Rabbi Yossi Merdaya Kenivlas Behema Tahora Shlitas Mitarasa Velo Malikasa. So Rabbi Yossi says this idea that the slaughter will take it away from being the Tumah of a Nevela, that only works by an animal, but not and by shlita by a bird, but it doesn't work by malika. So the Gemara says no, velohi. We reject this idea that since Rabbi Meir derived in this manner, therefore this proves that you can something that's learned that from a hekesh can then go and teach from a binyanav. Hasem to have a him mishlita dechulin kasim. There, the original source is coming from the shlita of chulin. And we want to know, and our whole idea, the whole question we're saying is this double derivation by kachim. And so there it's coming not from kachim, but from chulin. And so therefore it's not an answer to our question. Rashi says that this is, like we said earlier, that this is like this. So the case we saw earlier that we argued with Rav Papa, and Rav Papa tried to bring a proof in this manner, and we said no, it has to come straight from Kachim the whole way through. Okay, so now we go out to the last one, which is Davar Halamed. So we don't have an answer to that question. Davar Halamed bebinyan av ma'alish Halamed behekesh. Something that is derived through a binyan av, i.e., through this comparison, that based upon the similarity of the laws, can then go and teach through a hekesh or gzera shava or kavachomer or binyan av. So something that is itself derived through a binyan av, can it then go and teach you any one of these four methods of derivation? So the Gemara says, Pshot mia mehachada. We can't answer all the questions, but at least let's try to answer one of them. Why? Well, what's the source? The source is from later on that we say in a brisa later on, we say that let's say the blood which was supposed to be sprinkled before nightfall, if it remained before being sprinkled at the proper time, and then you went ahead and you sprinkled it, how do we know that the carbon is kosher and it stays up? And what's the source for this idea? It's a Rabbinyan Sharei Lon Bein Murin is kosher, because also we know we do a comparison to the emurim, the innards of the carbon, that if they weren't brought at night when they're supposed to be brought, and it was the morning and they were disqualified, that let's say you went and you brought them on the altar, you don't have to take them back, but they remain up and like the rest of the imurim. And so just like by the imurim, we say that it could stay up and it's kosher. Also, the blood that it stays up, it's kosher. So that's a binyanav. And then we continue. Yotze, let's say something went out of the Beis HaMikdash, went out of the courtyard, and then went back in, and then it goes up on the Mizbeach. Hoil, that also can stay up. How do we know it doesn't disqualify? If it went up on the altar, it can stay up. All the Yotze kosher b'bama, because we have another area where departure from the temple is kosher. If it would be a bama, the private altars, tameh. How do we know if the animal is tameh, went up on the altar, it'd be kosher? Because there are circumstances where tumah is allowed if it's a communal offering, and you could bring in a state of tumah. And chutz lizmano. And how do we know if you had an improper thought beyond the proper time and went up on the altar? How do we know that it can stay up and the carbon is kosher? Since we know that the sprinkling of the blood is effective, that it causes you to be liable for eating the meat through pigul, therefore it's called a carbon. And if you went up and brought it on the altar, you don't take it down. Chutzlim komo. And what about if you had the improper thought beyond the proper place? Again, we'd say hol v'hukash l'chutz lizmano, because it was compared to chutz lizmano, beyond the proper place. It was compared to beyond the proper time. Shekibu psulim v'zarku daman b'hanach. So let's say shekibu psulim v'zarku daman. How do we know if a Kohen who is tamei and he was disqualified and received the blood and he sprinkled it, how do we know that it's kosher? And if it goes up, it doesn't go down. And that's only b'hanach psulim the chazul avodas tzibur. That's only okay if it was by those kohanim who are still going to be effective for a communal offering, meaning to say, like it's a tumah, which is allowed for the community. And so therefore it's allowed under those circumstances. And so therefore, anyway, we see from here, going back to the idea that we said, I think I might have even skipped the punchline here, because we went back and said, how do we know that the imurim are kosher? Because we said, Shari Lamba Bas are kosher, because Shlomim, after the first night, it's still kosher, because Shlomim, you have 2 days to eat. So again, the Gemara did first a binyan av to note that the blood is kosher. And how do we know that if the blood, which was overnight, went up on the altar, it's kosher? We learned that out from the innards. And how do we know that the innards are kosher? We learned it out from a shlomim, which is lichatchila. So anyway, we learned from here that you could, something that's derived from binyan av could then go and learn out from teach another binyan av. But the Gemara rejects this. The Gemara says, "V'chidan davar shelo bechsharo midavar shebechshero." The meat of the shlomim, that's totally kosher to eat it on the second day. That's most shlomim have 2 days and 1 night. And so you want to learn something about a murin, which is not kosher after the morning, from the shlomim, which is kosher. That doesn't make sense. So the Gemara says, you know what, you're right. The Brisa actually doesn't really derive it through the binyan av. Tana mi zos torasa ola riba. The Tana learns that all these laws, as we'll see later on in Daf Pei Daled from the verse, this is the teaching of the ola. Samech samech. That's what he relies upon. So in the end, the Gemara doesn't answer any of these questions about the binyan av, something derived from binyan av. Can it then go and teach through a binyan av? Instead, the Gemara moves on to the next line of the Mishnah. The next line of the Mishnah is, we learned to the Mishnah that the bull and the goat of Yom Kippur, shiyare adam, the remnants of that blood, you would pour to the western foundation of the outer courtyard. Basically, what's the foundation? The foundation was like a step that surrounded part of the altar, and it was 1 hama high, and it went all along the western and northern wall, and it also entered 1 amma onto the eastern side and also to the southern side, but it really did not occupy the southeastern side at all, as we'll see from our Gemara, which will be relevant. And this was only on the altar that was in the courtyard. So the Gemara says, what's the source for this idea that the bull and the goat of Yom Kippur, you poured it towards the Yesod Ma'aravi, my time? And what's the reason that it was poured towards the Yesod Ma'aravi? Amar Kra, it's based upon the pasuk. It says, Al Yesod Mizbach HaOlah asher Pesach ol moed. That you should take the blood that of the bull of the Kohen Mashiach after he sprinkles his blood in the sanctuary, and you should pour the blood to the base of the altar of the Olah. That's at the entrance to the Ol Moed. Means to say, Ahu the Paga Baresha, the Yesod that he encounters first. And when he comes out of the sanctuary, what he's going to encounter first is the western side of the altar, and so that's the one that he pours the blood first. I mean, say this accords, according to most commentaries, with the concept of ein ma'avirin al mitzvahs. We're not supposed to pass over a mitzvah. So now the Gemara is going to comment on the fact that there are 5 times in the Torah by the Chatas that it says there are 5 passages in the Chatas. In the Torah, there's the chatas of the Kohen who is anointed, who has to bring the bull of the Kohen Mashiach. There's a chatas that's brought by a court that makes a mistake, and that's called the Parel and Davar Shel Tzibor. There's the chatas of a nasi who makes a mistake, and then there's the 2 chatos of an individual who sinned, either brings a sheep or a goat. So, in all of these 5 passages, the Torah writes that you shall pour the blood to the yesod of the mizbeach, to the base of the altar. But the first 3 times, it also adds to the yesod mizbach ha'olah, to the base of the altar of the olah. And the question is, why those 3 times it says that? So Tan Rabbanan, so why does it say that? So the Gemara says we make a drasha. What does it mean? El yesod mizbach ha'olah, v'lo yesod mizbach ha'panimi. The first thing is we don't pour it to the base of the inner altar, which is the golden altar or the altar of the incense, which actually doesn't have a yesod at all. And the second thing, al yesod mizbach ha'olah, ein lo yesod l'pnimi atmo. That teaches us, the second verse is teaching us that the inner one doesn't actually have this yesod. And al yesod mizbach ha'olah. And what's the third one teaching us? Tein yesod l'mizbeach shel olah. And the third one is teaching us this idea that you have to give the laws of a yesod, meaning to say that you have to pour the shirayim for every korban that was done on the mizbeach ha'olah, on the tein yesod yesod mizbeach ha'olah, meaning to say that all of the korbanos that are in the outer courtyard have to pour the shirayim to the yesod. So the Gemara says, so maybe it means, or maybe it means that the blood of the olah that's sprinkled on the altar should be done only on those horns that are opposite the yesod, and that's the southwestern or the northeastern. Maybe that's all it's telling us. So Amar Rabbi Shmuel, no, we're going to learn this idea is not derived from this pasuk, but this idea is derived from a Kal V'chomer. So, meaning to say, Gemara says we're going to learn it from a Kal V'chomer. We don't need to learn out from the verse Al Yisrael Mizbach Ha'olah. And what's the Kal V'chomer argument? We say Ma Shirayim, just like the Shirayim, the remnants of the Chatos She'em Mechaprim, that's not the essential aspect of atonement, but nevertheless Te'unin Yesod, they require to be placed on the Yesod. Tchilas Olah, the application of the blood of the Olah, which is the essential aspect of atonement, Shemechaperes, Inodin Shete'una Yesod. For sure, it should need to be applied opposite the Yesod. Comes along Rabbi Akiva and he gives a similar Kal V'chomer, just slightly different. He says like this: Rabbi Akiva, Ma Shirayim She'im Mechaprim Ve'im Ba'al Chapara. He adds that in, just like the Shirayim of the sin offering, that they don't serve as an atonement and they don't come to achieve an atonement, but nevertheless, Te'unin Yesod, they require the Yesod, they require the base. Tchilas Olah Shemechaperes Ubal Chapara, the beginning of the Olah, which does provide an atonement, and it does come for an atonement. Enodin Shete'uni Yesod. For sure, it should have to be on those corners that are opposite the Yesod. The Gemara says, Im Kain Matam Omer. If that's the case, why does it say in the pasuk El Yesod Mizbach Ha'olah? Because we've done 2 of them. So what's the third one coming to teach us? Must be Ten Yesod Mizbach Ha'olah, to teach us that all the karbanos that their blood has to be poured on the yesod, and that's the idea. So now let's analyze the brisa in order. So says the Gemara, Amar Mar al yesod mizbeah al yesod mizbach halah below yesod mizbach panimi. So that's teaching us it's poured to the base of the altar, but not towards the inner base. Meaning to say you're not on the base of the golden altar inside. The Gemara says, how can you say that that's what the pasuk is coming to teach us? Hami Baal Gufe. This pasuk was needed to teach us that you need to pour the blood on the shirayim. So you need to pour the blood on the base of the olah, not that teach us that you can't, that not on the inner altar. The Gemara says this idea that you have to put it on the base and the external courtyard, that's learned out from the words mi asher petach ol mo'ei nafka. That you would have learned out from the words at the altar at the entrance to the tent, without saying ha'olah. From the fact that it says ha'olah, we learn from here to put the shirayim towards only on the external altar, not the inner altar. And what about the next pasuk we cited? El Yesod Mizbach Ha'olah, that's said by the goat of the Nasi. It means, and now we're on Nunah from a base, 51b, and we're sad because there's only 3 lines for this stuff. We wish it would have so much more, but that's what we get. Only a 3-line Amud base. It means Ten Yesodom Mizbach Ha'olah. That means that anybody who has that you have to do the shirayim for everyone on every carbon, anything that goes up on the external altar has to have the remnants poured to the yesod. And so the Gemara says, because if you would say that this verse is just like it's written, that's teaching us about the goat of the Nazi himself, and not to teach us this drasha, Hani Lamali, this words, Yesod Mizbeach HaOlah, what are they written for? It could have just said Yesod Mizbeach, without saying Olah. And if you want to say Shirayim, that is to teach us that you have to pour the Shirayim on the base there. So why does the pasuk need to say that's obvious? Why would it need to tell us that it needs to pour it? Meaning to say, if the ones that are done outside meaning to say, for sure, since it's being done outside the sanctuary, for sure you're going to pour the blood there. Because even the chatos panimios, even the inner sin offerings, which are where blood is sprinkled inside, like the parakon of Mashiach and the parakon davar, we sprinkle them outside. For sure, the goat of the nasi, which is itself an external offering, for sure its blood should be poured there. And if you want to say, well, maybe we just do the reverse, that the ones that are brought inside, we pour outside, the ones that are outside, we pour inside. So we already established that the inner altar doesn't even have a yesod. So that's the first 2/3 of the brisa, and the last third of the brisa will be tomorrow's daf, but we can continue. We do have a few extra minutes. I'll just stop the recording. So